then and just all over the place. So we're glad you're here. And y'all represent how many states? This one group.
3 states.
Uh-huh. On this group. Okay. Fantastic. Well, I hope the weather continues to cooperate, because you've got I'm sure you've got an allotted amount to do, and time is of the essence, but we're glad to have you tonight. And don't rush off, and our folks, please take a moment to meet our guest. Ladies, don't forget about your circle meeting tomorrow at 10 o'clock. This will be at the home of Kim Benefield. All ladies are invited to come and be a part of the fellowship and the encouragement. All teens and adults going on the Montana mission trip, there will be, and Daniel puts in all caps, a mandatory training meeting for Big Sky Bible Camp at 5:30 on April the 27th. The meeting will be in the young adult classroom there in the education wing. So that'll be 2 weeks from tonight on April the 27th. All families and children ages, it says 0, infant through 5th grade, are encouraged to stay after services on the 24th, the Sunday before that, for a playground picnic. You need to be sure and sign up so they can ensure enough pizza and refreshments. So take note of that. Of course, not this Sunday with Easter, but the following Sunday. So remember that. There was a detailed paragraph in the bulletin regarding Senior Sunday, which will be 2 weeks? Let's see. 2 weeks from this coming Sunday, May the 1st. That sounds strange, but May will be here in 2.5 weeks. But Senior Sunday coming up on May the 1st. So check this past week's bulletin, but also the upcoming bulletin will have it in there as well. So be mindful of that. Let's see. I've got 2 different things I'm flipping back and forth to. As far as our additions to our sick list, Linda Barron, this is Candy Enlow's aunt, went back to the doctor yesterday and got a favorable update. Initially, they weren't sure how far her cancer had spread in the lymph nodes. They believe it's confined to that one area, which they can isolate with treatment, and so that is a big plus and a relief on their part. The oncologist does not feel like it's spread, and so they will attack that at that one particular area and get her in remission as quickly as possible. Others that we needed to mention, and Jackson's brother, Robert Galloway, is currently in Marshall Medical South. He was in ICU. He's now in a regular room, had been having some respiratory problems, but they've got him moved to a regular room. Bob and Isil Blankenship both have been ill. It was initially thought that Isil had food poisoning. Turned out not to be that, but then Bob became ill Tuesday night? Tonight, yeah, last night, and they had took him to the doctor, and he came within close proximity of dehydration. So this is there's something going on. I know I was in the barbershop yesterday, and one of the guys there had been down with it for 5 days. So it's he'd had Keith, to your point, he had COVID twice, and he said this was 3 times as bad as COVID was for him. So hopefully we can continue to dodge that, but remember Bob and Isil Blankenship in your prayers. My wife Kim, her mother Shirley Autry, suffered a stroke Sunday night. She was already under hospice care, but that has been taken up to the next level. She is there at her home in Greenville. So remember her as well. We announced, it was in the bulletin this last Sunday, of Andra Pendergraft losing her mother, Mildred Hurst. Services were held for her last Thursday in Arkansas. And then she had a 44-year-old nephew, Dr. Hinton, who passed away and the end of last week, and there will be a memorial service for him this coming Saturday in Little Rock. So Andra has lost two family members, lost her mom and then her nephew. So continue to remember them in your prayers. Any others? Let's bow. Gracious Father, we pause at the middle of this week and mindful of the busyness of it with our level of involvement in so many areas, so many good things, but to be able to put those on hold and come together tonight and to pray and to study and to share information that's of great concern. We thank you, Father, for that opportunity. We take note tonight, Father, of those that we've mentioned, those that have lost loved ones. We're very mindful of Andra and her family, that you would continue to evidence yourself on their behalf. Likewise, for those who are recuperating from surgery, we have those that are in the process of beginning treatments. And we just pray, Father, that in every one of these situations they would know of our love and our support. And equally, Father, more importantly, they would know of your abiding presence. Father, we're thankful for goes out with me. Have you noticed that? It never goes out with Jim, but it goes out with me. Maybe that's a sign. I don't know. All right. Okay, there we go. For the benefit of our guest, we have are involved in a study of the book of Hebrews, and we have been, I wouldn't say delayed or bogged down, but we've spent quite a bit of time in the 11th chapter, and for good reason. And we spent a couple of weeks talking about, because the writer does, the Hebrew writer spends a considerable amount of time talking about the faith of Moses. And so we looked at some of the high points of Moses' life and career and how that goes all the way into the next section, verse 29 and following, and we look at the people crossing the Red Sea, and then of course, and there's just so much there, and all of this, if you remember, is predicated on the definition that this 11th chapter begins with, and that is biblical faith is not situational, it's not based on circumstances, and equally as important, it's not based on prior experience. Because the people that are in this list are people who followed God's direction, even though A, they may not have understood it, and B, they certainly had never experienced it, but they did it anyway. What we also noted was these people did not make this list because they were perfect people. They were anything but that. They had their lapses in faith and moments when, in fact, last week we ended by talking about the children of Israel, because the writer says, by faith the people crossed the Red Sea as if on dry ground. Yeah, but that was after what? After they had already thought, well, let's just go back to Egypt. And God said, no, you're not going back to Egypt. And so it did take a tremendous amount of faith to step out and cross the Red Sea with the two. I think about, as I said last week, I think about Cecil B. DeMille's recreation. And by the way, I was thinking about this too, I'm sure everybody in here has seen that what was it, 1957 of the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. I don't think there's ever been its equal. But sidebar on that, they had made all, you can just think about it now, in 1957, the technology that we have now in comparison to then, they had made the preparation for that one scene when the waters of the Red Sea part. And Charlton Heston as Moses is up on the high part, and he originally had 3 or 4 different cameras to catch that. And when you know it, when they did it, there was only one that caught it. There was a problem with at least a couple of the others, and the one that you see in the movie is the one camera that actually captured it. And it was, the camera is behind Moses and the waters, part. And but originally he had planned to have 2 or 3 different other angles, but there were some technical problems and only one camera caught it. And I always thought that was really compelling, because I grew up, as a child watching that, and it really, it's one of the few times that I think Hollywood got it right. Anytime they try to do something from the standpoint of a biblical account, there've been some others that didn't fare as well, in my estimation, but this one was, and so. We highlighted that last week, the faith of the people to cross the river, and then initially it wasn't that way, but they did eventually cross. The destruction of Jericho, the faith of Rahab, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that because that's part of our gospel project curriculum. If you're in the auditorium class, you probably talked about Rahab 2 or 3 weeks ago. In my class, we still are. We're still talking about Rahab. So I stay behind. I stay behind everybody else. It's this next section I want us to note here in verse 32, because the writer just candidly says, and what more shall I say? Time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson, Jephthah, and of David and Samuel and the prophets. Now, what's not odd, but what's unusual about that verse, about verse 32? If you know anything about the book of Judges, they're out of order. If you're going to put them in chronological order, you would have listed, Samuel. He's there at the end, which is okay. But Samuel came before David, and Barak came before Gideon, and Jephthah came before Samson, and it's just Gideon is mentioned first, probably in all likelihood because of the tremendous victory over the Midianites. And I want to pause for just a moment and go back to the book of Judges and talk about this point that he's making about Gideon. And I know there's intention that the writer has with this, and let's see. I want to go to chapter 6 of the book of Judges, because keep in mind, it's not just it's not just a matter of saying by faith Gideon did this. It's a particular. You've got to be specific about the understanding of his definition of faith. Okay. And you go back to the 6th chapter, and here again, this is, there's just so many ironies in this, because the people, this is one of those cycles that the people lapsed into where they were, go back into idolatry, and God, allows them to be oppressed by a neighboring, kingdom. This time it's a distant cousin the Midianites. Midian, if you remember, was one of the sons of Abraham through Keturah. And so the Midianites come calling, and they are their oppressors for 7 years. Verse 2 says, the hand of Midian prevailed over Israel, and because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves the dens which are in the mountains and the caves and the strongholds. For whenever the Israelites wanted to plant their fields, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east would come up and attack them, and they would encamp them and destroy the produce of the land as far as the neighborhood of Gaza. They would come up with their, verse 5, they would come up with their cattle and their tents, coming like locusts for number. Both they and their camels could not be counted, so that they wasted the land as they came in. And Israel was brought very low because of Midian, and the people of Israel cried out for help. Now, you keep in mind there are 4 of these cycles in the book of Judges. The people lapse into idolatry. They're handed over to an oppressive nation. They repent and cry out. God sends a deliverer, and they're rescued. And that lasts for a little while, and then they lapse into it again. The interesting thing about Gideon is he is one of those unlikely candidates, because verse 11. Tells us, now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak of Orpah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress. What's strange about that? Yeah, that's not where you thresh grain. A threshing floor could be. Archaeologists have excavated, and some of those threshing floors were the size of this auditorium. It'd be a flat place where they were sure ideally if it would be between 2 hills where the wind would really come through, and they would throw that grain up in the air, and the wind blew the chaff, and the grain would you thresh grain out in the open. A wine press is what? It's below the ground. It's below the surface. It's a hole in the ground. So, in fact, Samuel tells us, as the writer of, in all likelihood, the writer of the book of Judges, he tells us why he's doing that, and he says he's doing that in order to hide it from the Midianites. Now, this angel of the Lord, there he is again. We talked about him the other day in the book of Joshua when he appears to Joshua, and we know. This is another one of his appearances. This is not a rank and file angel. I was doing a little background checking. This is God himself, right? The angel of the Lord. And in the account with Joshua, he's standing there with a sword in his hand, and Joshua wants to know, are you for us or for your enemies? And the Lord said, well, I'm neither. But as commander of the host of the Lord, I'm here, and you need to take your shoes off because this is holy ground. That's how we know it's not just a regular angel. By the way, it's the same angel that is standing in the road when Balaam comes along on his donkey, and he's standing there and he's got a sword in his hand too. Balaam doesn't see it, but the donkey does, and so he makes another appearance here. And I love the way, and I think all of our translations do a credible job with this, but here Gideon is, and he's threshing grain in secret, and the angel says to him, verse 12, the Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor. Now that seems a little bit ironic, because I'm sure Gideon didn't feel like a mighty man of valor. He's probably a little bit ashamed. In fact, we pick up on this because verse 13, pray, sir, if the Lord is with us, and this is so typical. If the Lord is with us, why then has all this befallen us? How many times have you internalized that same thought? you know, if God is with me, then why am I going through this? Why is this happening? It's reminiscent of the book of Job, right? Job asked the same question. And his friends, the difference is, Zophar, Bildad, and Eliphaz, all three thought, they knew why. They knew why all that had happened to Job. Job, you've done something. You've sinned, and you have angered God, and He's punishing you, and if you'll just repent, everything will be okay. And Job is compliant with that until what? Trying to figure out what it was he did. And he never could come up with what he had done wrong. And so Gideon is still a part of this. In fact, if you read on, he presses. He still doesn't really know who he's talking to, because he says, "And where are all his wonderful deeds which our fathers recounted to us, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has cast us off and given us into the hand of Midian." And look what the Lord tells him. Somebody give me a good southern paraphrase of this next phrase. "Go in this might of yours and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Do I not send you?" In other words, the Lord is listening. I mean, Gideon is saying, "Yeah, but if the Lord is this," and God is basically saying, "What? Won't you take that big mouth of yours and go and deliver them from the Midianites?" That's basically what he's saying. It's really, it's pretty compelling to me. Go in this might of yours. In other words, your big talk. You're talking to me. Now take that same energy and go. And what does Gideon do? Oh, wait. I didn't realize who I was talking to. At verse 15, look at the backtrack here. "Pray, Lord, how can I deliver Israel? Behold, my clan." Oh, here we go. "My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my family." In other words, what? I'm a nobody. I'm just, we don't have the prestige. I couldn't, nobody's going to follow me. It's one of the great sections on leadership that you'll ever come across in the text. I'm a nobody. And I'm thinking, the Lord's thinking, yeah, that's what Moses said. I've heard this one before. Y'all, same thing. And so the Lord, continues. And how many times have you run across this? Verse 16, the Lord simply says what? "But I'll be with you." That should be enough. And we have, and not to insert ourselves into this like we're Gideon, we're not, but there's so many other companion passages where the text specifically says that to us. The Hebrew writer would later say, quoting the words of Jesus, "I'll never leave you nor forsake you," in Hebrews 13. So it's interesting that this is what God had told Moses. It's what he had told Joshua, and now this is what he tells Gideon. "I will be with you, and you will smite the Midianites as one man." And true to form, Gideon says what? "If now I have found favor with you, show me a sign that it is you who speak with me." Now, there's a part of us that wants to just go, "Really? You're really going to do that?" But to be fair, and I think to be, in this instance, if we were to put ourselves in that situation, that's what I would have done. I mean, this angel is in the form of a man. He's just sitting there with a sword, probably punching the ground. He's not, as our artists render it, with this big set of wings and the bright. No, he just looks like a regular man. And so Gideon says, how do I know it's you? And so there's a series of signs, if you recall, and everything that the Lord told him to do, and prepares a meal, and the Lord, follows through. And verse 24, Gideon built an altar to the Lord and called it, "The Lord is Peace." And to this day, it still stands at Orpha, which belongs to his family, the Abiezrites. There's another incident here, and sometimes we bypass all this in a rush to get to the battle, and that's okay. But in the next paragraph, it's almost like, Gideon asked something of the Lord, and now the Lord's going to return the favor. And he says, I want you to take your father's bull and pull down the altar of Baal, which your father has, and cut down the Asherah that's beside it. Now, that would have been an altar to the primary Canaanite deity, Baal. The Asherah would have been a grove of trees that had been planted beside it. And God tells Gideon, pull down the altar and cut down the Asherah. And then build an altar, take the second bull, offer it as a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah, which you shall cut down. So Gideon took 10 men and did that. And the last part of verse 27 says he did it by night. Now the next day, you can read this. The men of the town looked up, and the altar to Baal's broken down. The Asherah has been cut down and burned. And they said, who's done this? And they said, well, Gideon, the son of Joash. And so the men of the town said to Joash, bring out your son that he may die, for he has pulled down the altar of Baal and cut down the Asherah. And verse 31, Joash says what? And this is reminiscent of Elijah. Joash, even though the altar and the Asherah were on Joash's property, those were under his control, I wonder if at this point he's figured out maybe Baal's not everything he claims to be, because Joash says to the men of the city, will you contend for Baal, or will you defend his cause? Whoever contends for him shall be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him contend for himself, because his altar has been pulled down. It's pretty logical. I mean, yeah, his father had put up the altar and planted the Asherah, and yet during the course of time, 7 years of oppression, maybe he had figured out Baal's not everything we were told he was. So he says, look, if he's a god, he'll take care of this. And that's the same thing Elijah said to the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. So anyway, all this is to why is God doing this? Because the next thing, he asked Gideon to do this relatively small thing, and he's obedient, he's compliant. Now he's ready for something bigger. So he puts out an all call for militia. You got to remember, during this time, the nation of Israel has no organized army. They won't have one really until partway through the time of Saul, and especially during the time of David. But even in the early years of Saul's reign, he would call for militia. And so no standing army at this time, which was unfortunate because they found themselves in so many military situations. So the Lord tells him to muster the militia in those surrounding tribes. Oh, by the way, after he cut down the altar and the Asherah, Gideon still needing a little reinforcement, needing a little more convincing, and this was with the fleece. Right? First night, it was verse 37. if you'll deliver Israel from my hand, behold, I'm laying a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there's dew on the fleece alone and dry on the ground, then I will know that you will deliver Israel by my hand, as you have said. And it was so. And there was so much dew on the fleece, it filled a bowl of water. Then Gideon said to God, let not your anger burn against me, but let me speak but this once. Let the fleece be dry, and the ground around it be wet. And the Lord did so. Verse 40, for it was dry on the fleece, and all around the ground there was dew. Now, here again, it's very easy for us to, Monday morning quarterback and sit here and read this and be a little bit critical of Gideon. But notice how patient the Lord is. So he says, okay, if that's... Keep in mind, earlier, and we're not going to talk about Barak as much as we're talking about Gideon, but earlier with Deborah and Barak, Deborah came to Barak and said what? Get up, go, and the Lord is with you. This is a day of victory. And Barak said, and I've heard this read, and the inference is Barak was saying, well, the only way I'll go is if you'll go with me. And some have inferred by that, he's thinking, okay, if this is such a great idea, then you go too. But I don't read it that way. I don't think he was challenging Deborah's, certainly not her credibility, or he was just saying, yeah, this is something that I would feel better if you were there. I think he believed in her. I think it's just the opposite. And the same thing, I think, to this degree, so that now when the Lord tells Gideon to muster the militia, and you know how this story works. The Lord said to Gideon, verse 2, the people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand. And of course, initially there were how many? Well, there were 32,000. Now, what we're not told is the exact number of the Midianites. You go back and read, the writer, Samuel says, you combine the Midianites with the Amalekite mercenaries, you couldn't count the men and the camels. So, I mean, this is a pretty big army. And Gideon, no doubt, had already seen, that number. And so he probably is thinking, well, 32,000, yeah, that might do it. But then God says, no. Why? Because if you go into battle with 32,000 and win, what are you going to be tempted to say? We did it. We did this by our own might. And God says, it ain't going to work that way. So tell all those who are fearful to go home. Well, 22,000. I mean, that cut it quick. 22,000 go home, left him with 10,000. But verse 4, the Lord says what? Still got too many. And so after they go down to the brook and they drink water, the Lord said every man that knelt down to drink water, keep him, and every man that lapped water up like a dog, you send him home. Verse 7, and when the Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men that lapped, I will deliver you and give the Midianites into your hand. And let all the others go. And so, here again, you read verse 8, and every one of those 300 were given a clay pot and a torch. And a trumpet. And they surrounded the camp of the Midianites, that, if you remember, that night. And here again, this is so reminiscent of the destruction of Jericho and all these other things, because we start trying to insert any kind of logic or rational thought into this, and it doesn't make sense. Why do you think, and I know, why does God go to such lengths, not only here but in other instances, clearly during the conquest, go all the way back to just on a relational level with we touched on this too when we were talking about Abraham and Sarah. God waited until Abraham was 100 and Sarah was 90, so that there could be no question that the only way they could have a child was because what? Because God was involved in it. Same thing with Zechariah and Elizabeth with the birth of John the Baptist. I mean, Luke, in his description of that, and we've laughed about this because I do think it's humorous, because when Zechariah gets the news of what Gabriel has just told them, and he goes, same thing with Gideon, how shall I know this will happen? Because I'm an old man and my wife is advanced in years. Now, Zechariah was old, but he wasn't dumb. He didn't say, my wife is an old woman. He said, I'm an old man, but my wife is advanced in years. Yeah, but that's one reason why when she found out she was expecting, that's why she stayed at home for the first 6 months. And then you remember Mary came and they compared notes, and both had been selected by God. The Bible doesn't tell us why Elizabeth, but she probably just felt like if I go out and before that, there's going to be a level of abuse or ridicule that she just avoided. Because at the end of the 9 months, here comes John the Baptist. And I guess what we see through the course of the text, I'm getting around to my question. Why does God go to such great lengths? And there's an obvious answer to this. And we want to say, when we look at the downfall of the nation of Israel, by the time you get to the time of the northern kingdom, and then of course the time of the exile in 606 beginning, and then of course the two subsequent exiles, we want to say, well, it was idolatry. Idolatry was the recurring sin that finally doomed the nation, and God had the 10 tribes sent taken away, never to return. The two southern tribes go into exile for 70 years. And I think in principle, it was idolatry. Ted? Okay, yeah. And here again, idolatry, unbelief, but we're coming back to I think we even can come closer to what was, those are more likely results. Brad? Yep. Easy now. No.
He went into battle, 300 against, and I heard 135,000.
Okay.
And so, that's like just impossible odds. And to get these Christians here who he's writing to realize it doesn't matter if we're outnumbered. God's going to take care of us.
Right. And that would make, there would be a high level of comfort, because like you said, their situation was very, very similar in principle. But when we look at these scenarios, Abraham and Isaac. Abraham and Sarah, and Zechariah and Elizabeth, and Joshua with the destruction of Jericho, and Gideon, and Deborah and Barak, and later on even with Samson. At the heart, I think, of idolatry, at the heart of their unbelief was pride. I think it was their arrogance that ultimately led to their demise. Because God is saying, look, I'm going to orchestrate this in such a way that there is no way that anybody can question whether or not I did this. Right. Yeah. Exactly. And here again, and I guess maybe it's a rhetorical question, but I think it's almost, and in fact, obviously God already knew what was going to ultimately lead to their downfall, and it could have been avoided, because all he's asking is what? Just remember how this all came to place. All this came into play, because all they had to do was say, well, God did it. God did it. And we come back to this whole idea of obedience. Well, what's interesting about this is, and you go back and read the defeat of the Midianites, and remember, even as a child hearing this in Sunday school, they blew, they lit the torches and they blew the trumpets and they broke the jars, and of course it was unbelievable in the effect that it had on the Midianites, and they basically destroyed each other through one of the largest examples of friendly fire in all throughout the Old Testament. And so they're victorious, and of course they try to make Gideon a king, and he defers from that, and consequently goes down through the annals of Israelite history as a great leader and a great man of faith. When we follow up with that, and like I said, we could talk about Deborah and Barak. I want to flip this, and next week we'll look at Jephthah, and then a little bit about Samson. Samson is kind of out there in his own arena, and when you begin to look at the career of Samson, remember, before he was born, the Lord told his parents he would be a Nazirite. No razor was to touch his head. He was not to drink wine or strong drink. And part of the Nazirite vow was he wasn't to touch anything dead. And when Samson begins his career, he's like Jason Bourne on steroids, right? And in his attempt, throughout the early part of his career, in his attempt to do what God was asking of him to do, and that is to harass the Philistines, but in the process of doing that, he's violating this vow. He was, drinking wine, and he was touching death. He got the hive of the honey out of the carcass of the lion. Well, Nazirites couldn't do that. And then ultimately, we blame Delilah for the haircut, right? But no, it was really Samson. And the issue is this, and this is, I'll kind of throw this out there enough to muddy the water, and we'll pick up at this point. A lot of people believe that the reason Samson lost his strength was because they cut his hair. But that's not it. It's a direct parallel to this with Gideon. The source of Samson's strength was not his hair, but he thought it was. Because you remember when Delilah said, "Why are you so strong?" And he said, "Tie me with all these fresh bowstrings, or tie me with ropes." No, all he had to say was what? God made me this strong. He never says that. And then he finally says, "Well, it's my hair." No, I don't think he said it like that. I'm sorry, that was a little too sarcastic there. No, that it's not your hair. But God says, okay, if that's what you think, then, because, you read on, and I'm jumping all over the map here, but he goes, and the Philistines take him, and they gouge out his eyes, and he's put in the mill, and he's grinding, pushing the millstone, and then the Bible said, but his hair began to grow back. And it's at the end of his career, of course, he prays, he finally gets it. And he didn't destroy the temple of Dagon, and he didn't do that because he had long hair again. It's because of the prayer that he prayed to God. And so look at that, and then, but before we do that, we want to talk about Jephthah, because the one thing that people remember about Jephthah is what? Oh, that's the guy that offered his daughter as a sacrifice. Ask yourself, and I know there's plenty of scholarly ink on both sides of this, but ask yourself, if he did that, would he have made the cut here in the 11th chapter of Hebrews? So ponder that, and we'll pick up at this point next week.